Good evening, everybody. It's 9 o'clock. Welcome to all of you who are joining us tonight. As usual, I have Tony here with me, who's going to be co-hosting with us tonight. It's a reflection on Stoicism and the Stoic philosophers. As you guys know, my training is primarily in philosophy and theology, and there's so much that we can learn from these great teachers of the art of happiness, if you will. They were the very first ones to try in the history of thinking to figure out how to be happy. So they were the first writers of self-help material, actually. So let's begin our reflections tonight. I'm really glad that you're able to join us. Let's begin our reflection tonight with a prayer. I posted on my Twitter account as well as on Facebook the original text of the Serenity Prayer. Most of us know the first couple of lines, but it's actually a much longer prayer. It was written by an American Protestant theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr, who was also a political commentator. He was very much involved in the political life of his country. He was also a theologian, Protestant theologian, but very ecumenical, very open to everybody. He was also an ethicist, a great guy. So let's begin our reflections tonight with the Serenity Prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, wisdom of the difference, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that He will make all things right if I surrender to His will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with Him forever in the next. Amen. There's so much pain and suffering that's going on right now all across the planet. Over the last couple of years that I have been counseling people online, not just people from here, but from other countries as well, there is a common thread that runs through many of the conversations that I've had with people. And the most important thread that I've sensed or detected is a sense of loneliness, a sense of loss. For many, actual loss of friends, of family, of livelihood, a loss as well of those certainties that we used to have, those things that used to define our lives. Many years ago, or just even 2 years ago, at this time during the year, October's about to end, the Christmas season would be going full force, and we'd all be out there planning for our Christmas gatherings with our families, buying presents already, thinking of the things that we will be getting for ourselves or for people for Christmas, and everybody's sort of just really looking forward to the Christmas holidays. There's something different this year, more so than last year, as a matter of fact. Many have thought that last year things would go back to normal in a couple more months, and now we know that things are going to be this way for a while. And so the question, of course, is how do we not only survive but thrive in a situation like this? Remember, the point is not survival. The point is to thrive. Okay? I mean, if all we can hope for is to survive tough times, that's not the way to live. Okay? We must not only survive, we human beings thrive even in difficult circumstances. And so that is the point. Okay? Not just survival, but thriving. So how do we thrive? Okay? How do we thrive? We Filipinos are very resilient. We are some of the most resilient people on the planet. A couple years ago, I was a student in Belgium, and I remember there was this big storm, and I was in the seminary lounge watching TV with my buddies, and we were watching. I think there was a typhoon that was ravaging the Philippines at that time. And I remember one of my classmates, Chris, he says, "What is wrong with you, Filipinos?" I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, look at you. There was a show. It was a CNN feed about the typhoon here." He says, they've lost their houses. They're neck deep in water. And when they see the camera, they wave and they smile. I said, "What's wrong with you people?" I said, "There's nothing wrong with us. That's how we survive. We don't give in to despair too easily. Okay? We are basically a happy people. The thing is, what we're facing right now is different. And what we're facing right now is different. Many of the certainties that we've had as a people, as a country, even as a families, have begun to fray. Families are sometimes torn by so many things. Vaccination, political leanings, name it. My family, for example, we are somehow torn about these things too. Not everybody agrees. Okay? How can we retain our hopefulness thing and resilience? How can we be stronger in the face of everything we're going through? Not just in a way that makes us forbearing. Hindi naman pwedeng palagi na lang tayo nagtitiis. And that's why I understand why so many people are frustrated and angry at the moment, because sabi nga nila, hanggang kailan kami magtitiis? And they are right. They are right. There's a point where people need to stop simply being forbearing, and they need to start fighting for what is rightfully theirs. We can't allow ourselves, to forever bear the brunt of, the bad things that are happening all around us. Bad things that are done by people that should be trusted to have the welfare of everybody in mind. So how can we, in fact, be more hopeful and resilient and positive without simply nagtitiis, okay? But to actually fight to change things and realize that we have the power to change things. Remember, the prayer says, the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, but it also says the courage to change the things I can. We Pinoy sometimes are too strong with the first half of that. The serenity. We're very serene. We always say, there's that line, bahala na. And my grandmother used to say, that originally came from si bathala na, meaning si bathala na ang bahala sa atin. Okay? God will take care of things. Life will take care of things. Life somehow takes care of things. That is true. There's a certain stoicism that's built into us. And we always say, nasa Diyos ang awa, nasa tao ang gawa. We do stuff, and we leave to God, to aid us, and that is true. But we do have the capacity to change things for the better, for ourselves, but also for our kababayans, for our countrymen, for many who suffer. Okay? How can we change things without giving into despair when our efforts sometimes fall short? And that's always the tricky part, The fear of failing sometimes makes us simply resort or retreat to the first part of that prayer. The serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Failing, despite our best effort, must not lead us to simply take refuge in the first part of that prayer and simply say, well, that is life. What can you do? Si bathala na. So how can we, in fact, find a way, to really accept those things that we cannot change, but to fight, to change those things that we can? And lastly, how do we distinguish the two? And so tonight, we're going to be talking about the Stoic philosophers. There's two philosophers I'm going to be mentioning in particular. One is a man by the name of Epictetus. These are ancient philosophers, of course. And the other one is Marcus Aurelius, Those of you who've seen Gladiator, Richard Harris played the Emperor Marcus Aurelius in that film. Marcus Aurelius is one of the great Roman emperors, and he was also a philosopher. Okay, aside from being an emperor, Epictetus was a slave. He began his life as a slave. You know, and interestingly enough, he eventually became a philosopher. He educated himself, and then he became a teacher, a very influential person in the ancient world. So you have a slave on the one hand, who ended up becoming a really happy human being, successful too. And on the other hand, you have an emperor. So, you know, opposite extremes of the spectrum here. An emperor who also became a philosopher, okay, and who was considered to be one of the last of the 5 great emperors of Rome. So he was really an amazing guy. In fact, he wrote books. Epictetus wrote a book entitled Enchiridion. If you get the chance, check it out online. It's available on Google. It's spelled Enchiridion. Enchiridion. That's the title of the book. And you know what? When you read that book, I'm telling you, it reads like a self-help book, an ancient self-help book. And it actually contains a great many secrets of happiness in the ancient world. Secrets that many of us, unfortunately, moderns today, seem to forget. So I would highly recommend that you find the text of Epictetus' Enchiridion. If you want to know the spelling of Epictetus, it's in the post that I have on my Twitter page and my Facebook page the last couple of days. Okay, so that's Epictetus. The other one is Marcus Aurelius. Now, Marcus Aurelius also wrote a book which also reads like a self-help book. It's called the Meditations. And the Meditations are a very influential. It's a very influential book. It has been read by emperors, by kings, by presidents, by prime ministers. It's a very popular book among the leadership class. It's also been read by CEOs, by CFOs, by COOs. You know, because it's like Sun Tzu's The Art of War. There's another really great read if you get the chance to read. If you want to read like books written by the great sages of the ancient world. But the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius also reads like a self-help book, an ancient self-help book. And many of the things that you will find in self-help books today, actually, they're very shallow compared to what these guys say. Yeah. Aside from those two, we're going to be looking very briefly at the thought of the Stoic philosophers. Okay? The Stoics were a group of philosophers in the ancient world. They were very active in Rome, and their primary concern was, as I said earlier, to discuss, to analyze, to talk about, and to teach, for lack of a better word, tips on how to be happy. And by happy, they don't mean, the superficial kind of happiness that one gains by, binge watching Netflix, or watching, a particular film that he or she really likes. No. They're talking about something much deeper than that. Something that you find in your gut. Something that you experience when, let's say, you're with a loved one, you're on a vacation, you happen to be in an amazing place, like maybe you're on a beach, and you got nothing to do, and you're just enjoying yourself there, and you're just at peace, and everything is calm, no worries in the world. That kind of happiness, where everything seems to be right. And that's the happiness that they try to look for. Okay. Now the Stoics, interestingly enough, eventually influence the very early Christians. You see, Christianity, okay, just like today, Christianity is affected by the culture where it finds itself. So let's say, Catholics here in the Philippines, Christians here in the Philippines, we're all Christians, but the way we express our Christianity or Catholicism is different from the way, for example, that Americans express their Christianity. I was just talking to the bishop here a couple of days ago, and we were talking about the Christmas season. Christmas season here in the Philippines is fascinating. It's the longest Christmas season on the planet. I mean, we start, the first day of September, and then it doesn't end until, pretty much January. And people always ask, does Christmas end with Three Kings? Or is it longer than that? You hear people ask that. I remember when I was growing up, one time we had the Christmas tree all the way to mid of February. And that was because we were lazy to remove the tree. But we Filipinos, we're Christians. We celebrate Christmas from September all the way up to January. And, the bishop and I were talking a few days ago, and we were commenting about the fact that in the United States, the day after Christmas, you won't see any Christmas films or hear Christmas music on the radio or on TV. It's all gone. It's all gone. So Christmas begins right after Thanksgiving. Actually, Thanksgiving, they already have Christmas stuff up. You got Halloween, you got Thanksgiving, then right after Thanksgiving, the Christmas rush begins, and then everything ends Christmas night. The following day, you will not find any Christmas stuff anymore. So, we're both Christians, but the way we practice our Christianity is quite different. And, because of the culture. And so the ancient Christians were themselves affected by the culture of the Stoics, and the philosophers surrounding them. Remember, the Christians lived in a world where there were Jewish people, there were Greek people, and there were people from the East, Persians, Medes, people from all across the Far East, or the Near East. And so they were affected, and then the Romans, of course, the Roman Empire, their way of thinking was affected by their interaction with these different people. And one of the influences on early Christians was the Stoic philosophers. In fact, the word Stoic, and the word philosopher, you will actually find in the Bible. You will actually find these words in the New Testament, because St. Paul had many interactions with the philosophers of ancient Greece, including the Stoics. So we're going to very briefly look at the influence and the impact, nothing very deep, the impact of Stoic philosophy on Christianity. And we're also going to look at the differences. They're not the same. Stoic philosophy and the Stoic way of life, while it has parallels with Christianity, they're not the same. Okay? Stoicism is a path towards worldly happiness. Christianity is also a path to worldly happiness. But Christianity recognizes that worldly happiness has limits. And therefore, Christianity focuses our eyes not only on worldly happiness, but on the happiness of the life that is to come. Stoicism doesn't have that. Okay, the ancient Greek philosophers, for all their brilliance, their sights were limited to this life. And when this life is over, they're pretty much agnostic about what comes after. They try not to say anything about whether or not there is something that comes after. And so their happiness, their optimism, if you will, and their hope is far limited. This is all you get. You make the most of what you get, because once it is over, it is over. Where Stoicism ends, therefore, where the Greek pursuit, where the philosophical pursuit for happiness ends, the Christian promise begins. Where the great sages of this earth end, Jesus begins. That's the amazing thing about our faith. That doesn't dismiss worldly wisdom. It's very important. But it recognizes that it has limits. Okay. And finally, we are going to look at two individuals, Christians this time, who in many ways embody both the Stoic ideal, if you will, if you can call it that, but also the best of what Christianity can offer. A man and a woman. Teresa of Avila, she was a brilliant woman. She's a doctor of the church, wrote a lot of books. Okay? Also teaching the sisters, the nuns who were under her care, how to be happy, how to be joyful, how to live their lives in such a way that their lives are going to be worthy of their calling, of their vocation. Okay? So Teresa of Avila, we're going to be looking very, very briefly at something that she wrote. And finally, one of my favorites, a man by the name of Karol Wojtyła, whom I actually met in person a couple times. And his was a most remarkable story. Not just because he was Pope John Paul II, but because as a man, his story was just amazing. And even if he didn't become Pope, he was still an amazing, amazing human being with a story that is worth repeating over and over again, if only to remind ourselves that it is possible to be happy in spite of adversity. Let's look very quickly at Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus. As I said earlier, Epictetus was a slave. He eventually became a freedman and a teacher. He wrote the Enchiridion, and as I said, it reads like a self-help book. I certainly hope that you read his text. Let me just give you, one very brief excerpt from Epictetus's Enchiridion, and this is something he says this, and this is we prayed the prayer from Niebuhr earlier. So these are the first lines of Epictetus's book. He says, "Some things are in our control, others are not. Some things are in our control, others are not." And then he says, the things that are in our control are opinion, goals, desires, and the things we don't like. Opinions, goals, desires, and the things that we don't like. He says those things, we can control those things. Okay? And then he says, in a word, whatever are our own actions, we can control. So there are obviously things that are immediately controllable by us. This distinction is very important for these guys, as we will see. Now, he says, but there are also things that are not in our control. We can't control these things, no matter how hard we try. He says, our bodies. Now, obviously, science back then had not progressed as much as it has today. I mean, the amazing things that human beings can do with their bodies today. I mean, just with, our ability to form, to fashion, and to mold our bodies, with fitness and everything. I mean, Epictetus obviously was not familiar with any of these things yet. Or, the fact that, we were able to develop, humanity was able to develop vaccines in such quick a time. Okay? But he says that our bodies, we can't really control them, which is true. We have no control over our genetic makeup. We have no control whether we have X or Y chromosomes or X and X chromosomes. Those are givens. I mean, we have no control over our height. People keep asking me, are you tall? I said, no, I'm not. We don't have control over the color of our eyes. We don't have control over the color of our hair, although you can color your hair. You can wear contacts. But ultimately, the color of your eyes, the color of your hair, the statistics that you have, that you write down, you have no control over that. Who our parents are, at least our biological parents, we don't have control over that. Reputation, he says. Now, here too, in a way, we do have a certain control here. If we don't do stupid things, and most likely people will respect us to a certain extent. I mean, they can say all sorts of crazy things about us, but at the end of the day, you can't put a good man down. So reputation, he says. The people we command. The people we command. And those of you who are managers or are higher up in the managerial chain, you will have people that you command. But then once you're not in that position anymore, then you can't command those people anymore. So Epictetus says the things that we cannot control are those things that are not our own actions.
So immediately this guy says, listen, you must be aware of those things over which you have power, and over those things which you don't. Okay? Because he says, and I'm not going to read the entire text. Again, I hope you guys find the text. You'll find it in Google. Okay? He says that if we focus on those things that we can control, okay, it's likely that we will be happy. We can be happy because we can mold those things, we can control those things, we can shape those things. But if we focus, he says, on those things we can't, and we insist on controlling them, he says we will get hurt. If we insist on controlling those things we can control, he says, no one can hurt you. No one can harm you. People can say all they want. I have no control over people's opinion. And so why should it bother me? I do something nice to somebody, they don't say thank you. There's nothing I can do about that. So why should it bother me? A person says something not so pleasant about me or not so kind about me. Why should that bother me? I have no control over the other person's behavior, right? On the other hand, I do have control over how I would respond to that behavior. If I let the opinion of others affect me, if I let the opinion of others bother me, then I will be harmed. I will be hurt. And some people walk around hurt all the time because they're constantly bothered by what other people say about them. We have no control over what other people say about us. And so if we let go of that, what is there to harm us? Nothing. And then we can spend our energy rather than on bothering or worrying about what other people say about us. We can spend our energy on trying to find things that will make us happy. Setting up a business, studying well, planning for the future. See? So Epictetus was right. Now Marcus Aurelius, again, this man was an emperor. Okay, Epictetus lived before Christ. 50 BC was the time when he was most active in writing. Marcus Aurelius, he was emperor from 161 to 180 AD. So this was already after Jesus had lived and was crucified and went back to the Father. But he was a Roman emperor, and as I said, he was considered one of the last good emperors of Rome. He was considered a philosopher king. Those of you who have studied philosophy, Aristotle's goal was to create the philosopher king. What's a philosopher king? A philosopher king is a government leader, if you will, who is wise, who is good, who is virtuous, who is true, who is kind, who is generous, who is everything. So it's the ideal. Okay? The ideal. Would that our leaders were philosopher kings. Most of the time they're not. That's really sad. But in the ancient world, people were also clamoring for that and looking for that. And there were teachers and philosophers in the ancient world who would teach their students, form their students, and educate them in the hope that one of them would turn out to be the philosopher king, the leader who was all of these things, the ideal leader, who would be efficient, effective, loving, kind, generous, devout, everything. Maybe you already have a sense that that's an ideal that seems impossible. You can travel the planet to try to find a leader who's going to be like that. It's very hard to find those. From time to time, people like that arise, but they're very rare. And Marcus Aurelius was one of them. He was a real philosopher king. There's a story about Marcus Aurelius that he appointed a servant, whose only job was to follow him when he walked around town, or when he would be visiting the soldiers, or when he would be going around visiting the marketplace, or when he'd be going around the city to just inspect things. Okay. Now Marcus Aurelius was a highly respected man. He was a very powerful man. He was a really great emperor. Okay? Everybody loved him. But Marcus Aurelius appointed a servant to walk next to him, to do only one thing. As he walks around, this servant would have to whisper in his ear. Okay? The only job of the servant was to whisper into Marcus Aurelius's ear, was to whisper into the emperor's ear the sentence. And he would have to repeat it again and again. Remember, you are only a man. Remember, you are only a man. I mean, think about that. This man was one of the great emperors of the ancient world. Everybody loved him. You know, he was so powerful. And yet, he had a servant who constantly reminded him that despite all his power, he was just a man. Now, that is a very important element of Stoic philosophy that, according to the Stoics, allowed us to actually remain happy. And what is that? Humility. And the recognition that, you know, despite all the good things about us, and there's many good things about us, we're just people. And all of us are just people. You know? It doesn't matter what your opinions are. It doesn't matter what your orientation might be. It doesn't matter what your likes are, what your dislikes are. We're all just people. And no matter how great our achievements are, we're just men and women. And eventually one day, you know, like all men and women, our time on this earth will end. And so a key, one of the most important elements to being happy, according to the Stoics, is the recognition of who we are for precisely who we are. We don't have to pretend to be something we're not. Okay? We don't have to look good in front of people. Okay? We don't have to be concerned about how we look. We don't have to be concerned about, being praised by people. Happiness for them, first and foremost, consists in being precisely who we are, no more and no less. That is a very liberating thing. I don't have to pretend. I don't have to pretend, to walk around and, one of the things that somebody had sort of clued me in with this whole social media thing, although I think it's been going on for a while now. Like people have like all sorts of, it's true, you can pretend to be something online. There's even songs about that, But then why? Why do you have to be that? You don't have to be that. We simply have to be ourselves, and that is the first and most important ingredient to being happy. Because we can get to live our lives just the way we are, and just the way we want to. Not according to what others might say about us or how we live. It is the most liberating thing. Okay? Now, let's move on to the Stoics now. So that's Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus. Now, the Stoics were a larger group of philosophers. There's a whole bunch of them. So Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius are just two of the more famous ones. Okay? As I said earlier, the Stoics, their teachings, these are ancient sages. Okay? Their teachings center around the idea of happiness. How can a person be happy? Here, and right now. Not in an afterlife. No, I know I'm going to be happy in an afterlife. No, that was not their concern. How can I be happy right here and right now? Give me a recipe for happiness. Okay? And so their idea of happiness was not an abstraction, like a pie in the sky kind of happiness. No. They wanted concrete things. Okay? So the question is to say, how can I be happy this week? How can I be happy next week? How can I be happy tomorrow? It's Wednesday. Okay? Middle of the week. How can I be happy tomorrow? It's Wednesday. Hey, I think about the fact that it's the middle of the week. Okay? In a couple more days, it'll be the weekend. So that was their concern. How can I be happy right here and right now? That was foremost in their discussion. Now, one of the ways by which they tried to articulate being happy, they said, was that a person who is happy is a person who is virtuous. They were very concerned about the idea of virtue. Now, unfortunately today, when we think about virtue, people think about sexual virtue. No, that's not what the Stoics meant. Okay? But by virtue, they meant, that thing which defines a person in terms of doing what is right. If you do what is right, you're a virtuous person. If you don't lie, you're a virtuous person. Okay? If you don't overindulge in alcohol, you're a virtuous person. If you're a person who is just and doesn't cheat, then you're a virtuous person. And according to the Stoics, virtue leads to happiness. Now that seems to be a little tough because you go, oh my God, he's going to be preaching about virtue. That's it. I'm done. No. That's not what the Stoics meant. Okay? Virtue for the Stoics was really much simpler. Virtue, according to the Stoics, was acting according to nature. Okay? Well, that seems very complicated and philosophical. No, it's really very simple. What did they mean by acting according to nature? Okay? It was really simple. For them, to be virtuous and to be happy was to act according to the dictates and laws of nature. I'll give you a very, very concrete example. Okay? If you're driving and suddenly you feel like you gotta pee, right? Or you gotta do number 2 in the bathroom. Now, if you don't act according to the dictate of nature, or maybe you can't because traffic's really bad, right? And you just gotta be like a racehorse, then you're gonna be uncomfortable. I mean, let's say you're holding it in for, an hour and a half, 2 hours. That is going to be extremely uncomfortable. Now, if you really can't find a restroom, and there's nothing you can do about it. However, if, let's say, you're walking around a mall, and the restrooms are readily available, and you keep telling yourself, no, I'm not going to do this right now. So you just basically neglect the command of nature for you to use the restroom because you have to pee like a racehorse. That's actually going to be bad. In a sense that it's not only going to make you uncomfortable, it will actually be bad for your body if you do that constantly. And that's what they mean. There are certain things that are dictates of nature. And if we go against the dictates of nature, we're going to end up unhappy. Nature has its laws, they say. Life has its laws. Human existence has its laws. And if we act against the laws of life, of existence, and of nature, it's a sure recipe for unhappiness. Okay? So part of what the Stoics, there's almost something Eastern and Buddhist about this. This is life, this is existence, okay? This is nature. You don't go against it. You go with a flow. Okay? You act accordingly. And by doing so, you become happy. And you do away with discomfort. You do away with stress. You do away with anxiety. For example, it is the nature of other human beings to talk about other people. That's what people do. Okay? They either talk about something exciting about their life or they talk about other people. Sometimes they talk about you. They talk about us. Now, is there anything we can do about the fact that that is what people are or how people act? No, we can't do anything about that. That is human nature. So, if we insist, that a person who happens to, maybe a person's a busybody and they just like to gossip. If we insist that that person stop being what he or she is, we're going to be extremely upset and angry and disturbed. And we're not going to be at peace. If we know that that is the nature of the person, and we recognize that that is his or her nature, and we simply accept that to be the fact, and we try to act accordingly, then we will be at peace. We're not going to be bothered. We're not going to be stressed. And so, according to the Stoics, when you violate the laws of nature, you end up unhappy. Or when you try to go against them, or when you try to change them, you're going to end up unhappy. And so the goal of the Stoics, what would lead them to happiness, they believed, is balance and equilibrium. Balance. Okay? I recognize that the other person is the way he or she is. I recognize that there's nothing I can do about it. And I recognize that in order for me to be happy, I try to avoid it. Balance. Perfect equilibrium. Okay? The other person may kick and scream, calling our attention. But we go, you know what? I love you as a person. I respect you as a person. But what you're doing is just not something that gives me happiness or peace. So why would I engage in it? And that leads us to a very important element that you will find in Stoic philosophy, and which sometimes is misinterpreted. And the Greek word for it is apatheia. Apathy. Now, the word apathy has a very negative connotation, yeah? It's, whatever, yeah? Whatever. We hear that a lot, especially from young people. That's not what apatheia or apathy means for the Stoics. It simply means detachment. Detachment for the Stoics is what leads to balance. If we do not attach ourselves to those things that we cannot control, like the opinion of others, if we do not attach ourselves to those things which we cannot control, like the things about ourselves which we cannot change, there's these characters on. I don't know if you guys have seen those. These characters who have gone through so many massive facial reconstructions, cosmetic surgeries, again and again and again. One time, I was still in Miami a couple months ago. They were featuring this lady. They were calling her Barbie, and she had a counterpart, and they were calling him Ken. And they had gone through so many massive reconstructive cosmetic surgeries that when you look at them, you realize, wait a second, they don't look normal anymore. Hey? They don't look normal anymore. And then, of course, after they're featured, there's a discussion on the psychology of that situation. That there's actually a massive problem with individuals who are that way. Okay? They become too desirous to actually change who they are in a way that eventually becomes problematic. They had a feature of a lady in particular, not one of these ladies who had more or less success in what she was trying to do, but the doctors were telling her that, listen, a couple more of these surgeries and your nose would just fall off because the tissue around your nose is no longer able to handle any more surgeries. So she says, this is it. You reach the end of the line. You cannot keep doing this to yourself. Okay? Detachment, apatheia, for the Stoics, again, is not apathy. It is simply recognizing that there are certain things in life, in existence, in nature, and in ourselves that simply have to be accepted and left alone. Because to try to change them is to do violence to them. And by doing so, we do violence to ourselves. Okay? That also leads us to consider another important element that you will find among the Stoics, in their idea of apatheia or detachment. And that is a detachment from emotions, from too much emotion. Okay? For Aristotle, who is a great philosopher in the ancient world, virtue, he says, lies in the golden mean. Okay? Neither excess nor deficiency. A person who is virtuous is not a person who doesn't drink alcohol, nor is it a person who has too much alcohol. A virtuous person is a person who has alcohol in moderation. Okay? A person who engages in the good things in life, not in excess, not in deficiency, but in moderation. The Stoics, on the other hand, had a different idea. They believed that in order to be happy, one has to somehow detach oneself from the passions, from emotions, from too great an emotional reaction to things. You know, if we get too excited about things, when the thing that we're excited about is gone, we usually end up feeling empty. Or there's some of us who are, who are temperamental, right? And we get angry very easily. And then, especially those who are good people, after they have, they blow their top, they feel guilty. And they say, Father, I got angry again, and I yelled and screamed at people, and I really feel bad. They feel bad because they don't want to do it. But they give in to their emotions, their passions, and so they're left with a certain sense of emptiness. And so the Stoics would say, try to learn to control your emotions rather than allowing your emotions to control you. It is also true, from time to time, people would ask me, how do you deal with, with sexual desire? Right? I would go, well, and then they would say, so do you guys still have them? You're priests. Of course we do. We're human beings. That never leaves you. But there's a difference between experiencing them and controlling them, and experiencing them and having them control you. Because once you allow them to control you, then you lose control over something over which you actually have control. And remember, for the Stoics, being in control is very important, because it is the key to being happy. Controlling those things which we can in fact control. Okay? And so for them, being detached from too much emotion, okay, was a way to rid ourselves of the tendency to react too emotionally, or egotistically to events. Something says something nasty to us, we can't control what they say, but we can certainly control how we react. That's within our control.